Welcome to the Entrusting the Faith podcast. I'm your host, Eric Rutherford, and today I am thrilled because I have with me David Murrow. He has written the best-selling book of all time about men and the church, why men hate going to church. He's helped thousands of churches become more welcoming and engaging to men and boys, and he is currently working on a sequel, Why Men Suddenly Love Going to Church. So David's been interviewed by the New York Times, NBC Nightly News, Moody Radio Networks, and many others. He's been interviewed on Focus on the Family, Family Life Today, and Dr. James Dobson's Family Institute. And David's going to tell us why, for hundreds of years, men considered church unmanly, why they suddenly see it as manly, and he'll give us advice on how a local church can capture men's hearts. David, welcome to the show.
That's a tall order. Well, I'll do my best to answer those questions.
I have no doubts. And I have to say, after I read the book, there were so many things in the book when I read it, and so that's why I was thrilled to be able to just kind of go through that with you today, and even more to talk about your new book that's coming up, Why Men Love Going to Church.
Well, let me set the table for us here. So when I wrote Why Men Hate Going to Church in 2005, I was describing a gender gap that goes back 700 years. There have always been more women than men in church. And so church was always kind of a feminine coded thing. If you went to church, you were less manly than the man who didn't go to church. You think about it. How do men signal their manhood? They fight, they curse, they drink, they sleep around, they kill people, they commit crimes, they stay up all night drinking. These manly behaviors were off limits for Christian men. So the first thing you got to do when you become a Christian is you got to put away all those manly behaviors, and you've got to embrace a set of behaviors that a lot of guys would think are feminine. You've got to become sensitive, caring, loving. You've got to put away all those. You can't curse anymore. You can't sleep around anymore. I mean, how are you going to prove your manhood? And so that was kind of the world that I wrote that book into 20 years ago. And so I gave a lot of advice in that book about how churches can do subtle things to turn the knob a little bit more toward masculine without going all the way to macho. Because that's the thing. Men and women appreciate healthy, life-giving masculinity. What they don't appreciate is macho posturing. So that was sort of the basic premise of the book, and it's just gone crazy. It's in 12 different languages. I get letters from seminarians all the time. Pastors, sit with them. And it's just become a very helpful book, especially with the return of men that we're seeing right now, because men are looking for guidance. Pastors are looking for guidance. What do I do with these guys? And so that's why I feel like I need to write a new book. It'll be coming out around Christmas time of 2026.
That's awesome. And it's true. You talk about this whole idea of church behavior being unmanly, unmasculine. What makes men, I say ambivalent about church, but that I think at best ambivalent oftentimes.
Well, yeah, we can dive into some of those behaviors. Like when you go into church for the last couple hundred years, you might have to hold hands with your neighbor. You might have to sing love songs to a man named Jesus. It's gotten really kind of bad with the praise and worship movement. There's definitely this, we judge people's faith by how emotional they become in church. Oh, look at that brother. He's crying. He's waving his hands. He's obviously loves the Lord the most. So we kind of set up this expectation that the best Christian is the one who becomes the most emotional, or the one who is the most sensitive, the most caring. And those can be good things. I'm not anti-emotion or anything. But when we set that up as the bar, women are always going to have an easier time doing those things than men. If you think about it, hey, finish this sentence for me, Eric. Big boys
don't cry.
Don't cry. Every boy learns that when they're little, right? If a 5-year-old boy skins his knee, he tries to hold the tears back. Girl doesn't, right? She can do it. In church, the man who cries the most is the one who's believed to love the Lord the most. And so we kind of judge men by how emotional they become. And this is really becoming an issue as the church becomes more and more Pentecostal, because emotionalism is a big part of the package. And I don't think it's fair to men. I love the words. I read this book by a guy named Jesus, and he said, if you love me, you will become very emotional in church. If you love me, you will sway to the music. No, he didn't say any of that. He said, if you love me, you will obey my commands. He set the bar very high. We've set it very low. And I think that frustrates men over time because they simply can't compete on the emotionalism scale like women can.
And I love that you brought the emotionalism up, because I know as a guy, it's hard to, well, it's hard to show emotion. It's definitely uncomfortable to show emotion around a lot of men. Like, there are some men I feel more comfortable with it, but that's, even there, it's not easy, and I still feel uncomfortable about it. And yet that is this progression that the church seems to have embraced, is emotionalism, and which is brutal.
And again, let me be clear. I'm not against emotion. If two guys are praying together and one guy, his marriage is falling apart and he begins to shed a tear, that's a good, solid thing, right? What I'm talking about is emotionalism, which is, in a lot of churches today, you're going to come in and the worship leader is just going to berate you for not raising your hands. Come on, let's praise the Lord. Let's get those hands in the air. They're just going to go after you to make you do this big display of emotion. And here's what I'm seeing. As part of my research for my book, I'm visiting a new church every weekend. Men are quiet quitting worship. I have not found a church yet. First of all, they're all the same. It's amazing. They're all the same. And I have not found a church yet where even half the men sing. They're just standing there watching the band, enduring the songs, enduring the music. Now, there's always guys up front, that got their hands in the air, but most of the guys have their hands in their pockets. Mm-hmm. So the way we've defined worship primarily in emotional terms, really, I think men are getting sick of it. Mm-hmm. I think Paul really gave us a clear definition of worship is. He said, present your bodies as living sacrifice. This is your true act of worship. And we've just redefined it as, no, your true act of worship is getting all emotional. And that's just a tough thing for men to do. Men pay a social price for that women don't.
It is. It's like, okay, I need to turn this on when I walk into a worship service, but it immediately turns off the moment I go outside. It's like I have to be two different people.
There you go. Yeah, good observation.
It's rough. One of the things I found fascinating at the beginning of your book is you have this quiz with this chart that gives two sets of characteristics, and you ask the reader, hey, which one better characterizes Jesus and today's disciples? And set A says competence, power, efficiency, achievement, skills, proving oneself, results, accomplishment, objects, goal orientation, self-sufficiency, success, and competition. Set B says love, communication, beauty, relationship, support, helping, nurturing, feeling, sharing, relating, community, loving, cooperation, personal expression. So those are my two sets. And then you ask which one better embodies Jesus as we in the church think is correct. And I love this quiz. I'd love for you to elaborate on this, where, and what results you've seen.
Okay, well, listeners, which one do you think best characterizes the value of Jesus and his true followers? Now, I've given this quiz to hundreds of audiences over the last 20 years. Christians and non-Christians, men and women, everyone always picks the second set. Everyone is much more comfortable assigning those values to Jesus than the first set. And then I tell them where they come from. They're from chapter 2 of the book, Men Are From Mars, Women Are From Venus. And the first set of values are men's values, the Mars values. These are the values that are commonly found among men. The second set of values are the Venus values. Those are the values commonly found among women. And so my point of the quiz is we are much more comfortable assigning feminine values to our faith. And we're not very comfortable thinking of our faith in terms of competence, power, achievement, efficiency, the things that men bring to the table.
And that was an ouch for me. As I read it and then saw where you got the list from, it was like, oh yeah, we're doing a horrible job of representing Christ well in the church. And like later in the book, you talk about this, this comparison of the Lion of Judah versus like the Lamb of God, and just those two things, and how we don't hold those together well. Would you elaborate on that?
Yeah. In fact, I wrote a follow-on book about this called The Map, The Way of All Great Men. And the theological or biblical case I'm making is in the first 7 chapters of Matthew's gospel, Jesus is all lamb. And then chapters 8 through 25, he's all lion. And then 26 through 28, he's lamb again. And so I've been teaching this. I teach this at men's retreats. And when I'm doing men's groups, I teach them this map to manhood. You have to go lamb first, then lion, then lamb. Now, in the church, we tend to only present Jesus, the lamb, the suffering Savior, the kind, the gentle, the nurturing. And these things are true. He is those things. He came as a helpless baby. He submitted to baptism. He wept over Jerusalem. He welcomed children to his side. Those things are all true, but that's only part of who he was. And I think over time, men get the message that you're supposed to be a lamb all the time. You're supposed to let people run you over. You're always supposed to, do whatever your wife says, keep her happy. It's gotten into some really bad theology. So I like teaching this framework. I teach men the first act in your faith is to become more lamb-like, but then you've got to become a lion. And if you skip that lamb stage, you become an angry legalist. If you just go straight to lion and you don't learn the softness, gentleness is not the basis of your faith, you become the angry legalist. And we see a lot of that in the church today, especially in the very online men. So there's just a lot of work to do to help men understand how to balance the lion and the lamb. And we need to express that in the church, not just through our words, but through our actions as well, and which actions we approve of.
It's true. And it is a balance. It's not like one or the other. Like both have to exist at the same time and coexist. But I like that framework where you're talking about, we do have to humble ourselves. We do submit when we come to faith in Christ. There is this softening and repentance, but then there is the standing firm in your faith. Absolutely. Never truly relinquishing the softness, but it's there while it's tempered with the firm.
I say it's foundational. I use a lot of it in the map. I use several metaphors, like with a horse, for example. You break the horse, you humble the horse, then you work the horse. The horse has a journey it starts with a journey of submission, then a journey of strength. And then when the horse is too old to work, you send him out to stud. And that's his journey of sacrifice, where he pours himself into the next generation of horses. So there's a lot of things in life that follow this 3-step pattern. And, I'll sell my book here. The map, it's a fun read. I wish you'd pick it up. The Map, The Way of All Great Men. Because I think it will help you understand when to be a lion and when to be a lamb. And it's not just Jesus. It's every great man of Scripture followed the same pattern. You start off as a lamb, you move up to a lion, and you finish as a lamb.
That's awesome. So if you're listening, I'm going to drop a link to that book in the show notes as well. I know I'm going to check it out, and because it sounds like a great description and map, very much for what we need to do as men. So let me ask as well about passivity. How does passivity play into this gender gap of the church, this sort of feminization of the church? Are men passive when they go to church, or do they become passive at church, or does it just attract passive men? I'd love to hear your thoughts on that.
Okay, well, let me ask Eric. When's the last time you went to church?
Sunday.
All right. What happened to your body in church?
Yeah, I sat, I stood, I endured, I smiled. I had to do small talk, which I don't like doing. It's
I'm
one
with
of
you,
the.
brother.
Oh man, I had to do the forced shake of hands, and I'm like, oh, please just let me be. But I was just there.
Yeah. I'm going to coin a new phrase in my new book. I'm taking a noun and turning it into a verb. So if you're an English teacher, I apologize but this is my new word. The main thing we do in church is we audience for preachers and musicians. Now, that's a fine. You do need to hear the word. You do need to sing, but we do a lot of audiencing. And most of my Christian life has been audiencing. So you're talking about passivity. We are modeling passivity. We're modeling consumption every time we gather. And if you want to do something more active, you have to do something besides church. You have to go on a mission trip. Great. Do this, do that. Volunteer. Great. Those are wonderful things. But they're not fully integrated into most people's Christian lives. Most people's interaction with the church is to come, watch the show, and then go home and forget everything they learned. That's the reality of what's happening. And so we're going to need some new tools. We're going to need some new ways of being the church that are more active. Because again, let's go back to that verse from Paul. Our true act of worship is to present our bodies as living sacrifices, not just as pew sitters.
Yeah, it's very much consumer mentality. We go, we consume, we leave, and anything else has to come separate.
It's an optional add-on. Yeah.
It's an optional add-on. I love how how you describe that, because it's so true. And so that is something I'm looking forward to hearing about some of those things. And in this book, you speak to several things. In the new book, I'm really looking forward to seeing what you break out and elaborate on. I think that'll be incredibly helpful to churches.
Hope so.
What in your book you also talk about man laws. Now we've talked we sort of touched the surface of it a little bit here. So what are man laws and how do they play out at church?
Okay. Well, I don't know if you remember, but a few years ago, there was a series of commercials from Miller Beer, and you had the Men of the Round Table. And if you haven't seen these, they're on Google, they're on YouTube. They're hilarious, these funny commercials. The Men of the Round Table are sitting around discussing what is acceptable manly behavior. And they make fun of men who do things that are feminine. They make fun of men who go to the bathroom together, the men who carry bags on the side, the men who have tramp stamp tattoos across their backside. Men who do anything, there's always been this one-way barrier. I call this Murrow's ironclad rule of the genders. Women can do masculine things, but men are absolutely prohibited from doing feminine things. In fact, if a woman does a masculine thing, she gains social status. Imagine Cindy goes to work on Monday morning and she says, "Yeah, girls, you know what I did this weekend? I changed the spark plugs in my car." What are her girlfriends thinking? "Oh my goodness, wow, way to go. You go, girl." Now let's say Bart goes to work on Monday morning and he says to his buddies, "Hey guys, guess what I learned to do this weekend? I learned how to make decorative pillow shams." What are his buddies thinking? I can't even say the word because this is a Christian podcast, but men lose status among their peers when they do something that is feminine, whereas women gain status when they do something that's masculine. So this all kind of ties into what we're talking about here with church. If church is perceived as something for women, men won't go. But if we put a healthy, life-giving masculine spirit into the church, you'll have both men, women, and their children fully engaged. And that's kind of been my mission for the last 20 years. Try to help churches put a masculine accent, not a macho accent, but a healthy masculine accent on what they do. And that's been a great formula for growth.
And I love that idea, that masculine accent, not macho, but masculine. And you're right. It's men won't do anything they consider to be feminine. They just they would rather go to the dentist. They would rather whatever, they would choose the horrible thing over being associated with the feminine.
Yeah, it's true.
It does. And how does church language play into that? Because the words that we use in our worship services and our prayers, how does our language make men uncomfortable and not want to be there?
Well, I think a lot of it starts with our song lyrics, love songs to Jesus. I tell a funny story in the book about two hunters who are in a duck blind, and one of them turns to the other and begins reciting the words of a popular praise song. "You're so precious to me in our secret place." And it's very romantic. So, of course, the other hunter pulls his gun on the first one. You don't say those sort of things to a man, especially if he has a loaded shotgun.
No.
So, yeah, no, "You're so precious to me in our secret place." What we're asking men to do is express their love to Jesus, a man who is alive, using words no man would ever use with any other man. And so it just kind of feminizes the whole prospect. Again, back to this emotionalism, and it's an emotionalism in a kind of quasi-romantic sense. It just doesn't. I think men would rather be led onto the battlefield than into the bedroom.
And that's true. And I've definitely seen it as well. I have had this unease that I couldn't put my finger on about a lot of things in the local church. And that was like this moment as I was reading it, I'm like, that's why. Oh, okay, that's why. Language is another thing. And, I am, you can get into the music wars, and I'm not going to go there because I appreciate the way I've taught my kids, the way I speak to other people is there are hymns that are just not good and not biblical. And there are hymns that are sound and biblical. And there is contemporary Christian music that is sound and biblical, and there's some that's just garbage. So you can't put the genre with the value. But I think we've gone away from praising God for who he is and into this love letter mindset.
Okay, let me jump in there. I think we need songs that praise God for what he does rather than who he is.
Okay.
Men, praise and worship it's become this quasi-romantic thing where we just tell God how wonderful he is. No man would do that for another man. Eric, you're so strong. You're so beautiful. You're such a great... No. You say, Eric, come over and help me work on my car. Thanks, buddy. We're going to praise a man who helps us or does something worthy of praise. So I'm calling on composers to focus more on God's mighty works rather than just telling him how wonderful he is, because a man won't do that for another man.
We'll get back to the show in just a moment, but first, if you're a guy and you're asking, how can I be of consequence to my family? I would encourage you to pick up my book, Leading Well at Home, How Husbands and Fathers Can Biblically Lead Their Families. It has action steps to get you going in the right direction and help you equip your family to follow Christ. Leading Well at Home. Link is in the show notes, or you can go directly to Amazon to pick it up. Now, back to the show. No, it is rare and only occasional that a man would do that.
Yeah.
But the doing things, man, you killed that out there, man. Excellent job, man. I couldn't have done that if you hadn't helped me lift this thing or do that. Like, all of those things are absolutely true. Guys in general are much more open to doing those types of things.
And here's the thing: we're not making something up. God is doing mighty works among us all the time. There's plenty to praise him for. That's not just how beautiful he is. Lord, you're beautiful. Come on.
So let's talk about single guys in the church, especially young single men. Why are they so reluctant to go to church?
Well, I think we're still in the vapors of the old, 80s, 90s culture where men are going back hundreds of years, like I said in the introduction, where men define themselves by sin. The manliest man is the one who sins the most. So there's a lot of young single men who still define themselves that way. But here's an interesting thing. Even among non-Christians, the stereotypical sinful behaviors are pulling back. Drinking among the young is at an all-time low. Young men are paying lower insurance because they're not driving as much. They're not driving as fast. They're smoking less. They're young men. It's much less likely that young men get into a fist fight than they did when I was a kid. So these typical manly behaviors, how men define themselves, they're kind of going away on their own. I don't think this is due to some religious revival. So I think that's also part of the reason we're starting to see more men come to church, because they're paying less of a social price. They've already given up a lot of the sinful behaviors that they would have had to have given up coming to church 50 years ago.
That's a good point. And that is a good point, because I'm 51, and I grew up in the 80s and the 90s, and yeah, there's a definite, I remember in school and everything else, there is a definite behavior shift. And like you say, drinking, smoking, all of those things have decreased. Even so, I know young men are a difficult group to get in. Is there something that churches can do to combat this?
Yeah, well, we got to get into a bigger issue here.
Okay.
Young men today are consuming streams of content on their devices. So the world's strategy for discipling them is to provide a constant stream of content that baptizes them into a certain worldview, whether that's conservatism, progressivism, or gaming, or whatever it is. The world provides this constant stream of content. And so in the church, the typical model has been, come to the building, I'm going to talk to you for 30 minutes, 40 minutes, see you next week. We're not providing men with any sort of follow-up. We just send them home with no follow-up, no chance to review, to practice, no exercises to practice what was preached. I think in the future, the churches are going to have to wake up to the reality that they are going to have to not only just produce a single talk that they give on Sunday morning. I'm going to put it this way in my new book. The pastor of the past was a content creator. He locked himself in his office for 20, 30 hours, came up with a talk, gave it, and then everybody went home and thought about it all week because there was no media. The pastor of the future is going to be a content curator. He's going to give maybe a shorter message on Sunday, but then all week long, he's going to provide a stream of content. And this will be content from other pastors. He doesn't have to generate it himself, but reliable teachers, readings, etc., so that we're putting the gospel into the channels where men already go. And we're not just preaching on Sunday, see you next week. We're introducing a concept on Sunday, and then all week long, we're teaching you how to live it out using a combination of digital and in real life. So I'm actually working on something called Coaching Church right now, which would be that sort of a church. Much shorter sermon, but then all week long, you guys get something called the playbook, and they're being trained. I think that's ultimately what we're going to have to do with young men. If we plug them into the existing model of church, where they come once a week, see you next week, you stand while the band plays, you sit while the pastor speaks, that's going to get old. That's going to get old. And these optional add-ons, not everybody's going to be able to do them. I was talking to a pastor just this week, and I was telling him this story. We send people to church and we send them out with no follow-up. And he says, well, all of our small groups do a follow-up onto the sermon. And I said, well, that's great. But what percentage of your people attend small groups? And he says, oh, probably 20%. I said, you're lying. It's probably closer to 10. And all the guys around the table were, yeah, he's lying. 10% of your people do this. And I said, and the reality of small groups is they get canceled, kids get sick, sometimes they don't meet. But what if you were putting something in their hands every day on the devices they already carry? And his eyes got really big. And he says, well, I don't have time to build that. I says, well, AI can do the gathering, and then you do the curating. You just say, oh, this is good, this is not good. This is a trusted source. This is not a trusted source. I mean, we've got to up our game with men. Men will stay with us if they really see life change, if they see progress. But if they're just audiencing week after week, they're not going to stay with us.
No, and that is so true. And I love that idea of that content flow, because that's you're right. We today, especially young guys, like they've grown up with it. Like I again, I remember life before Google. I remember life before smartphones, but a lot of guys who are in our churches, they don't. Like that is just what they've always been. And so this content stream is incredibly helpful because, as you say, they're already there. I think the hard part for pastors is almost this humbling of themselves to be able to say, I don't have to do it all. I just need to put some good stuff in your hands.
Yeah. And we've sort of already been doing this. I mean, pastors recommend books all the time. Here's a great book by Francis Chan. Here's a great book by, D.L. Moody, whoever it is. The problem is people don't read books anymore. We've got to get those sorts of recommendations onto these devices where people already are. I mean, okay, I want you to imagine two guys. They both went to church on Sunday. So Eddie comes in, he goes to church, he stands while the band plays, he sits while the pastor speaks, he goes home, and then all week long, he never thinks about the sermon again. Now, Fred goes to this different kind of, this coaching type church. He stands while the band plays, he sits while the pastor preaches. But then on Monday morning, the first thing he does, he picks up his phone, and there's his playbook for the day. And there's a scripture reading that refers, and a devotion that refers back to the message he learned. So all week long, he's being trained to practice what was preached. It would be so easy to generate this, but I can't find a single church in the world that's doing it yet. And so that's what I'm trying to do, is get this going and tell pastors, it is so easy now to gather these things and create a content stream. Why don't we do this? Why don't we, instead of letting our sermons die, or, Eddie, when he picks up his device, there's no content. He just goes to Fox News Channel, or he goes to whatever. And he's more discipled by the secular influencers than he is by his pastor. Let's not let this opportunity go by. Let's use the digital tools we have in our tool belt to train, we introduce a concept on Sunday, but then we train people every day. And if you're a pastor out there and you want to get this going, please contact me at davidmurrow.com. I will help you get your coaching church going.
I love it. And that really speaks into this question of discipleship too, because, as I've talked to people and I've pointed out, like you become something by, someone else giving it to you. You become a man by being around men. You don't become an electrician by learning it from an elementary school teacher. You learn it by being with an electrician. The trades get this, right? And yet we in the church don't. We have men's groups that don't work and men's ministries that just that are not helpful. So what's that look like as you're seeing is how important is this discipleship aspect for men?
Okay, I'm glad you brought up men's ministry because there's a lot of really great innovation going on in that sphere, and I'll be reporting on that in my new book. But a lot of us are still based in the old model, which men's ministry equals Bible study, it equals a pancake breakfast, it equals a service project, Nothing wrong with any of those things. But what's interesting is whenever we gather men, we often gather them for a mini church service. Like, okay, we're going to come at 6:30 on Wednesday morning, and there's going to be a praise band, and we're going to sing 3 songs, and then there's going to be a speaker, and then we're going to do breakout groups. The only thing we do different than church is the breakout groups. And a lot of guys have to go to work, so they miss breakout groups. So the churches, or the men's ministries that are really having a huge impact they're getting men up at 6:30, but they're meeting out in the field and they're doing some laps and they're doing things with their bodies. And then there's a talk. And then as they go around the circle again, they do a challenge and there's an object lesson and they try to carry something and that represents their sin. You know, they're being innovative. They're involving men's bodies, not just their minds. And they're doing tremendous things. These guys are getting transformed walking around a track instead of having a book in their hands. As precious as that book is, merely knowing the book doesn't lead to transformation. That's the Pharisees. They knew the book, but they weren't transformed. But Jesus took his men around and did things with them, and they were forever changed. So I think this is actually, we've got to work full body experiences into men's ministry if we're going to attract and retain and transform the next generation of men. It can't just be another mini church service.
So true. And so I've been part of a Men's Alliance tribe since January. And that's been fabulous. I have to say that's been fabulous.
Have you interviewed Goose yet on this show?
Actually, I'm interviewing him Tuesday. Next Tuesday. Yeah, so I'm thrilled. He accepted the invite and that group has sort of redefined some things for me. Like it really has. I'm like,
well,
okay.
Tell everybody what you do in Men's Alliance.
Oh, yeah,
I'll give you some of my time. Yeah.
Oh, in Men's Alliance, we meet once a week. It's for an hour. It's a hard cut at an hour. We do 25 to 30 minute workout, and then we do a 25 to 30 minute devotional. It's all, everybody leads, everybody builds a fire, everybody leads a workout, and it's a good time. It's a low barrier to entry, but yet there is this challenge to men to sweat beside one another, and we suffer together and we share together. It's really cool.
Yeah, it's amazing. When I did some research, and at the time I wrote Why Men Hate Going to Church, Islam was the fastest growing religion among men in America.
Wow.
And so I saw what they did in the mosque. They're up, they're down. It's almost like a military thing. They're almost marching in place. And there's no women in the room. It is only men. So they were actually kicking our butt there for a while, especially among African Americans. And Black men grow up in a very feminized church culture, very much about emotion, very much about the church ladies and their hats and their gloves and, 3-hour-long sermons. So a lot of Black men were finding a home in Islam because Islam felt masculine. So it comes back to my main point. If you want to engage men and make them feel like it's something for them, you have to speak with a masculine accent. You have to do things that men do, not macho, but masculine.
It's true. And as I've seen it, as I've read it, it's like, man, that makes such a difference. Let me jump into your new book that's coming out, Why Men Love Going to Church. So why write that one?
Okay, well, we are seeing this historic return of men to church. For 700 years, church has always had more women than men. All of a sudden, studies from Barna, from Pew, are all showing higher identification among men, Christian identification among men than women. And we're hearing anecdotal reports from all over the world that men are showing up in Catholic parishes, they're showing up in Episcopal churches, they're showing up in churches, Pentecostal churches. They're coming to all sorts of churches. So I thought, all of a sudden, why is this happening? So I'm going to, chapter 1 of the book. I think it's a sociological phenomenon as much as it is a religious phenomenon. In 2005, when I wrote Why Men Hate Going to Church, I've already established the fact that church spoke with a feminine accent. It was more feminized than culture. Then let's go into the 2010s. Something new came onto the stage called wokeness, progressivism. And the right way of being was being caring, sensitive, nurturing, don't offend anyone, apologize all the time, tribal land acknowledgments, we're so sorry. This was how the government, how businesses, how every institution became feminine in their expression. Even companies that catered to men. Bud Light showed a transgender influencer on a can of beer. Gillette showed a transgender shaver. And men were just like, what the heck is going on? Every institution has abandoned the traditional roles of men, toxic masculinity, men. There was just all this cultural movement toward feminine. The one institution that didn't move was the evangelical church. We didn't go in for wokeness. We didn't go in for transgender surgeries. We weren't all in on the Palestinians. So what happened is church didn't move. Society moved all the way from being more masculine to being more feminine. Are you following me here? There'll be a graphic in the book to show you what I'm talking about. And then there's these two unhealthy extremes. There's extreme wokeness on the left, which is very feminized. And then you have this unhealthy masculinity on the right, which I call the manosphere, where, it's all about, doing terrible things to women and all these things. The church really, the evangelical church really provides in most evangelical churches, a healthy middle ground that avoids either of those extremes, the macho preening of the manosphere or the unhealthy nurturing of progressivism. And so men are feeling like the church is a refuge for them. The church never called them toxic. The church never said you're not supposed to provide or care for a woman. The church was always pro-marriage. It was always pro-family. Now you've got women on the other side. Women have become much more progressive. And women are actually, for the first time, they lose status by saying, I'm a Christian, because they're not woke. Being an evangelical Christian, you're not woke. And women are supposed to be woke. They're supposed to be all about caring and nurturing and sensitivity and for these various victim groups. So what's happened is men are actually gaining social status by saying, I'm a Christian. It's a way of signaling to each other, I ain't woke, brother. But women are losing social status. I'm an evangelical Christian. Oh, you're a Trumpy. Oh, you're a, whatever, right? And so we've had this complete shift in the last 10, 15, 20 years. So back to my original premise, this is as much a sociological phenomenon as it is a religious one. And church, I think we got 2 to 3 years to catch this wave. And we can't just turn these guys into Charlie Kirk disciples. I'm not saying anything about, Charlie's fine. But I'm saying they've come because of Charlie Kirk. They've come because they hate wokeness. We've got to turn them from their sociological, into true disciples of Jesus. That's our challenge in the next 2 or 3 years. They're in the house. Let's not turn them into the next generation of passive pew sitters.
I did not realize that shift to the church for men in the last few years, but it makes total sense because men have nowhere else to go, and not being a man.
Yes,
you cannot go with what culture holds right now, and say I'm a man, and you just can't. You can't land there.
No, and there's a lot of unhealth on both extremes.
Oh yeah,
the macho preening of the right. I just can't stand it. And all the sickening. We need to wheel children into operating rooms and turn them into amputees in the name of kindness. What? It's just insanity on both sides. But I think a lot of churches are doing a great job not falling for either of these deceptions. There's two genders and we love them both.
Yeah. And I love that. But I agree. I think we've got a narrow window to do that before things shift or before something else happens. And then we lose this influx, or before they say, this is better than out there, but this isn't great, And
you nailed it. Yeah. Let me audiencing. We've got to do something besides audiencing. And it can't be an optional add-on. It's got to become a regular part of what we do. I will guarantee you, Eric, the longer you stay with Men's Alliance, the more you're going to hear this sentence from guys. Men's Alliance is my church. Have you heard that yet?
I haven't, but I've seen, I know some guys who are like, this is the only place I feel welcome.
Yeah, I hear CrossFit is my church. Mm-hmm. AA is my church.
Yeah.
What we consider the parachurch is often a better disciple-making vehicle than regular church. So regular church, let's learn from their example. Let's see what's actually discipling people and figure out how to harness those things. There was a really courageous guy 500 years ago named Martin Luther. Have you heard of him? Yeah. He wants to train illiterate, information-starved, isolated Germans how to follow Jesus. There's this new invention called the printing press. So he figures out a way. He invents the modern sermon. stand up in front of a stage, put a learned man with a book in his hand, and lecture for 40 minutes. This was an amazing innovation. Here we sit 500 years later, and we're still doing it Luther's way. We have not adopted hardly any of the new technologies. We're still putting a learned man on a stage with a book in his hand, lecturing for 40 minutes. See you next week. That is not going to get it done with men.
Well, and you make a great point, because Protestant Reformation, Luther and Calvin and Zwingli and all of those, that really came about because of the technology of the printing press and the dissemination of information, and they leveraged that to the hilt. I mean, that's, suddenly the people who couldn't afford a book now had access.
Yeah, and they could read it. The church taught them to read.
Yeah.
So revolutionary, life-changing, destabilized Europe politically. It was huge. I'll share real quickly. I'll share you one of my favorite verses, Acts chapter 17. Paul goes into Athens, and there's this place called the Areopagus. And pardon me, I'm going to paraphrase the verse from memory. It says, it was a place where everyone did nothing but sit around all day and share the latest ideas and talk about them. And I'm like, that's social media. We have a new Areopagus. People do nothing but sit around and discuss the latest ideas. And yet what we put into that Areopagus is so bad. We have the Christian judgment, you're going to hell. Abortion is murder. You're a murderer. We're just so angry in that Areopagus. Was Paul angry? There was false gods all around him. He could have gone full Old Testament and started killing these false prophets. Did he do it? No. He sat down and he reasoned with them. He put the gospel into the terms they understood. And some were saved. Some weren't. So I think this is another thing that we've got to do. We've got to start training our people how to be good online citizens. How to win people to Christ online instead of just a verbal sales pitch to Jesus. Because I think Christians are doing tremendous damage online because of what we post. And so this is an area where we really do need to train all of our people, especially our men.
I hadn't even thought about the whole training process, but that's so true. It's how do we engage in a social media world and be a believer and not be angry? It's okay to have anger, but not to lash out in that anger.
Yeah, no, here's the way I put it. When you are on social media, you can be loving or you can be right. Now, a lot of people they're right, but they're so unloving. I'm going to stand up for biblical truth. You're a sinner. The plank's in my eye and I'm going to tell you about it. It's just, you can be loving and you can be right, but you have to lead with love. Paul said, if I have not love, I'm like a clanging cymbal. So we've got to train, especially men, how to interact online, how to win their friends to Christ with love and in masculine love. Hey, dude, let's do this. And I think, as you were saying, we've got this wave, we can catch it, but we've got to I'll give you another one here. In the modern church, worship is mandatory and discipleship is optional. Worship is mandatory. Discipleship is an optional add-on. Now, was that Jesus's priority? No. Jesus said discipleship is mandatory and worship is a very low priority. I'm going to blow your mind here. Jesus never brings up the subject of worship. He never teaches. He never tells anyone to worship. He never leads the crowds in song. It's not that it's wrong to worship or that it's wrong to sing. We have given it such a huge amount of our time, energy, and attention. And we've got to ask ourselves, if we're doing this with our time, what are we not doing? We're not making disciples. We're making a great show that gives people all the feels, but we're training them to come to church and have the feels. We're not training them to courageously follow Jesus.
It is. It's cotton candy Christianity. It really is. It's just nothing but sweet and sugary and empty.
Yeah, it's all the feels. And again, I'm going to qualify this. It's not wrong to feel emotion. It's not wrong to have a strong feeling toward Jesus. But if that's the end point, if that's the goal, if we're using the smoke machines and the lights and the subwoofers and if we're trying to create this feeling, we're missing the boat, because discipleship is not about feeling Jesus. It's about following Jesus. And we've got to ask ourselves, if we're spending 20, 30 minutes doing this, what could this 20 or 30 minutes, how could we reapportion this time to actually doing the thing Jesus told us to do?
Indeed. Man, indeed. So as we wrap up here, any last takeaway you want to leave with our audience?
We can do this. We have a powerful God who wants to see this done. What we've got to do, we've got to have courage. It's so hard to give up what we've been doing for 500 years. It's hard to, we're going to make people mad. I'm sure every worship leader who was listening to me on that last sentence, it has slammed their phone to the ground but again, I'm not anti-worship. I'm just saying that we've got to do it the way the New Testament tells us to do it. But back to your point, final words. We've got to have courage to reimagine what we do through the lens of discipleship. Is this making a disciple? Are we making a disciple? And we've got to have the courage to say, if it's not making a disciple, we're going to do something else.
Yeah, that is powerful. So, and I would agree. And then as we wrap up, if people want to know more about you, they want to know more about your books, where do you want them to go?
Pop this up on the screen for me. It's davidmurrow.com. That's all things related to the books, to the coaching church. I've got a lot of exciting projects going on that I'd love to help your church implement so that you can catch this wave of men and boys and experience the harvest that Jesus promised.
davidmurrow.com. It's going to be in the show notes. We're going to put it on the screen for you. David, this has been phenomenal. I had to cut it because we ran out of time and I didn't even, it just slipped by. It was just that kind of conversation. So thanks for joining us today. I appreciate it. I know the audience does too.
Thank you, Eric.